conversation with Becca Holland. And yeah, it was a pleasure. And we just, our kind of paths crossed. We're both, well, I'm a blow into Galway. I live here. You're a native of Galway and you've moved. And yeah, Becca, it's really, I'd love to tease out because you've done phenomenally well on social media. You've done phenomenally well in getting your message out to your audience. You did change careers, and I think many of the people listening to this, they're probably in an occupation, and sometimes, you reach a certain age and you're second guessing. So
Yeah.
you've packed quite a lot in, and so a small bit of background.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? The road turns really fast. I was a PE teacher for the majority of my 20s, and now I'm in my early 30s. And it was only about a year and a half ago I went into health coaching, because a good few years before that, I moved to the Netherlands and did my master's there in Maastricht. And I kind of did the year master's and it was really intense. And then I got back to Ireland and everyone said, there's no jobs in that area now, like in health and in hormone balance. And I was like, wow, okay. And I kind of put it to bed for a little while, because I think in 2015, I wasn't in the headspace to even know that I could start a business. It just wasn't even, I couldn't even understand the concept. So I went back teaching, kind of knowing it definitely wasn't my vocation. I love PE as a subject, but I found it very hard to teach. I love to coach, because when you're coaching, people are there because they want to learn that specific sport. But I found teaching really hard because I suppose secondary in general, teaching girls and boys, I suppose, is quite difficult because there's just such a mix in there. It's just, I don't even know solutions how to improve PE across the board, but I think somebody that would thrive is somebody that's just has that vocation for teaching. And I just kind of knew that I wanted to teach adults. I knew that at the time, especially because through my 20s, I had hormone imbalances. And that's what I wanted to teach people, to move away from that the way I did, and learn the solution. So yeah, left teaching when I had done 2 years maternity leave. I have 3-year-old twins now. And when they turned 2, I went into coaching and started the business. And everything just took off really quickly. I was just very lucky. My social media, within kind of 6 months, I had 500,000 followers on Instagram, the same on TikTok. The Facebook was big as well. So it all just, my coaching business straight away exploded, and I was booked out. And I kind of realized initially I really wanted, obviously, to focus on hormone balance. That was my bread and butter. That was what I really understood. But then I realized you can do so much with nutrition, with exercise. And I started to see that it was the stress management piece of the puzzle that was so vital, because majority of the people that came to me were chronically stressed and they couldn't implement the nutrition advice and the exercise advice because they just weren't in a position mentally to do that. So a lot of my work started kind of pushing over to nervous system regulation and understanding where they're at psychologically. So like what started as very much predominantly nutrition kind of evolved then into that kind of nervous system regulation side of things and the mindset, because I think to understand where you're at, you have to understand what's happened to bring you to the present. So that's kind of where it's at. So everything now, I suppose, what I've seen really is so important for women, especially. And I think it's just so recent that people are beginning to catch up with this, is that regulation of the body and feeling safe and kind of resolving the chronic stress piece of the puzzle is what creates hormone balance, is what creates physical health. So often I think people think they're very separate, your physical and mental health, but you can't have good physical health without the mental side of it. So it's just, yeah, as you know yourself, it's such a vital part of the puzzle. And it's just so nice to see women thrive off the back of understanding that you can balance. I often talk about cortisol because that's your stress hormone. And I experienced chronic stress, I suppose, in 2020. And I could see so many things happen physically with like chronic headaches and skin, all off the back of that. Like I had chronic urticaria, them hives for like 6 months. And this was years before I was a health coach. And when I reflect back, it's so crazy how at that period of time, I was very stressed. and I went to all the endocrinologists and dermatologists. I was so inflamed that I couldn't sleep at night. It was such an intense itch, especially around my abdomen, that I was taking so much antihistamines I actually couldn't drive. So I didn't understand at that point. I thought it must be my bedding, it must be my new house, it must be all these things in my environment, but it was such an internal thing. When I came out of that and I started to slow down, I was a devil for rushing. When I began to slow down, that's when the urticaria left, but also a lot of other things in the body balanced. Regular cycle came back, and it just shows the power of actually slowing down.
I think you've just opened up a minefield in terms of the questions. I said at the start, I said I've nothing prepared, and now I don't know. I have so many questions flooding into my head. I don't know where to start. So, chronic stress. What are the main factors with people coming in over the years? Like, is it family life? Is it corporate? You know,
It's such a mixture, but a lot of it is like the family household where the woman is also caring for the parents, the children, and a career. And that kind of trio is what pops up a lot. And even if it's actually just one of them, that's still extreme. Like, I always think of this. Imagine if it was 100 years ago, what responsibilities would we have had? What pace of life would we have had? So we're like 10xing the pace of life at the moment. Even if you're single and you have no kids or anything, even a 9 to 5 job alone, that's a lot of stress on the body. And that's hard to acknowledge because we're all in that situation where, like, I'm juggling a business, I'm a lone parent, I have 3-year-old twins. And for me to think, oh my God, this is so stressful, that's not where I want to be. But it's just recognizing you have to counteract that level of stress. You have to do things like the breathing tools, you have to do things that are counteracting all of that kind of stress environment that most of us are in. And it's not necessarily bad if you understand how to slow down and how to counteract it and certain tools. But if you're like the stereotypical person that's spinning like 10 plates, that's when it's very easy. If one plate drops and you go into burnout, that's very easy to happen, and probably much more easy than most people recognize. Like, the majority of women I'm seeing aren't abnormal in any way. They're the norm in society because like, so many of us are just like that woman who's constantly rushing, constantly has the to-do list and is minding many people, and you kind of neglect yourself. So that's like the person I see, that how it happened, that clients in their 30s are having fertility issues. I deal a lot with trying to conceive. Clients in their late 30s and 40s are dealing with very difficult perimenopause symptoms, especially the kind of when progesterone dips to too low of a level, and that anxiety increases because progesterones are a calming hormone. And most women go into perimenopause stressed. So that exacerbates the perimenopause symptoms. And you're in this position where you're more anxious than you've ever been in your whole life. And you don't have a clue how to deal with it because most of us are very clueless about what happens in peri and postmenopause. When I see a woman that's postmenopause, what normally happens is they've been so stressed for so long that now they're just kind of stuck, and they're thinking, I don't even know how to pull myself out of this. I've been stressed for so long. So it's kind of like I see that the reproductive years, perimenopause and postmenopause, the influence of stress in all three is so significant that it's just amazing to see when you're aware of that and when you understand what to do, how quickly you can regain good health and, like, I suppose, headspace.
okay. How would you recognize it? Because I have a feeling that we're all in stress, but
Yeah,
some of us are just better at overriding the signals of the body. And maybe when we find it out, it's too late.
that's so true. And I've had this conversation recently so much about the indicators of what is burnout and what does burnout feel like. But even before you get to the stage of burnout where you're in collapse, you're feeling your sleep is disrupted. And that's a huge thing people come to me with, because circadian rhythm, for me, I'm obsessed with it because I had a year of sleep deprivation when my twins were born and I became a lone parent, and it was COVID. And I fully understood at that point why people get severe mental health issues, because when you take away sleep, everyone knows how damaging that is mentally and physically. So the mood drop.
No, but Becca, the strange thing is, and listen, I totally agree with you. The psychiatrist and the psychologist and the psychotherapist isn't, for me, I don't think they do take into consideration sleep quality. And like, I totally agree with you. I think we will never get a calmness of the mind. So sleep is one of the big impacts.
Huge. It is the cornerstone of hormone balance. And if you don't have that piece, that's why peri and postmenopause is unbearable, because people aren't able to get into that restorative sleep for a number of factors. But one factor is that they're chronically stressed and the mind won't calm down. So if they wake up in the middle of the night due to various factors, they're not able to get back to sleep because they can't quieten the mind. So that's one huge part, plus a lot of other things going on in the body with temperature rise and all the rest of it. But just if we look at that piece of the puzzle and we really focused on that, restorative sleep would come so much more quickly. And there's such a difference, as you know, between sleep and restorative sleep. So a lot of people are sleeping maybe 8, 9, 10 hours, but they're not feeling restored in the morning. So like when you talked at my event about the mouth tape, I was so, thought, wow, this is another piece of the sleep puzzle to add in, that nose breathing element, plus the other factors of, understanding circadian health, understanding the need for light at the start of the day, understanding the temperature piece.
So when you talk about circadian, just even to break that down a little bit.
Yeah. So in the body, we have lots of little clocks, and they're telling us when to release hormones all throughout the body. So in order to get the circadian rhythm going really nicely, in the morning, we'll have that daylight and first light in the day. We'll have direct light into our eyes. And that signals then that night to release melatonin, our sleep hormone. If you're not getting daylight during the day and you're very sedentary, you're not going to have that sleep pressure, which will create that restorative sleep. So that's why a lot of us are not able to sleep well, because we're inside all day. And there's various ways to help that. And I always say to people, especially people that are starting work when it's dark, even like get outside for 10 minutes in the morning just to get that light in your eyes, even if it's Ireland and it's dull.
And can I ask, do you have to be looking out at the light, or you just have to be exposed? And the other question is, if you're close to a window, is that going to work?
Now, so ideally you don't want the glass in the way. So that's why ideally you don't wear sunglasses in the morning. You just take off the glasses. Glasses are usually okay because there's that gap and the light can go in, but ideally it's not sunglasses and not the window, So you'd have to, like, for example, open the windows of your car in the commute. Not ideal when it's cold, or like have your coffee with the window or door open, or your breakfast in the morning. So there's ways and means to do it. But even if you're in a very dull place that's raining on a dark sky, ideally then it's 20 minutes. But if you can get 10 minutes, great. If it's sunny, 10 minutes will suffice. That's enough to actually get that melatonin producing. So it's so nice to know it can only be like 10 minutes, ideally 20 in Ireland or anywhere that's very dull, but 10 minutes can do it. So I think like just understanding that alone, that's such an important piece of the puzzle. Like that's why getting outside more often, no matter what the weather is so vital for sleep. And obviously in turn then all hormones, because if you don't have sleep, you don't have hormone balance.
So, because you can only imagine now with remote working, like I work from home, my studio is here right next to my house. I literally go from my house to my studio.
Yeah.
And I could go without seeing daylight. So, and I'm sure many, many people are in the same boat. It's increased. So the big impact of that is that when they do go to sleep at, say, 10 o'clock, and is there a better time to go to sleep? Sooner rather than later? Or what way to do that?
I think the more you know about this, the harder it is to give an answer, because if you read Matthew Walker's book about chronotypes, it's interesting to think, like, for me, I'm kind of in the middle. I'm not a morning person. I'm not a night person. Anything earlier than 6 a.m. doesn't feel great to me. I'm not definitely part of the 4 a.m. club by any means. But I suppose it's finding the sweet spot, plus thinking about your lifestyle. So like ideally, in an ideal world, I'd be sleeping 10 until 6, but that's not ideal for some people. And if it's a night owl, like my dad is a complete night owl, and unless he does everything extremely by the book, like he gets the morning daylight, he's outside for a walk, he has a cool bedroom, he has maybe the warm shower or bath before bed, he has a lovely wind down routine, he's still not going to sleep till 1 a.m. So I think there's a lot to do with our chronotype. And I suppose, just what works for you. Like, depends on your kids. There's so many factors. So I don't really like to give kind of an all or nothing answer with that. 10 till 6 probably works really well for me. Whether I get it or not is a different story with kids, but that feels good.
Okay. So recognizing stress again. So one of the factors would be poor sleep, and we're talking about insomnia, not falling asleep easy, or maybe waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning and the mind is a little bit agitated.
Yeah.
Is there anything aside from that? Would people who are in chronic stress, how about are they losing their temper? Are they going into fits of rage? Are they having difficulty concentrating? Is there other factors? I'm just kind of think, how would you recognize it if you're in that situation as an individual?
Oh yeah, when you're really in that, I suppose, chronic stress, the other things that would happen is you're getting frequent headaches normally. That's a one that a lot of people would say is the headaches and migraines, especially for a woman, different parts of the cycle. So during, like, around ovulation and the luteal phase, the week before the period, you'd get headaches because when cortisol is high, so when you're chronically stressed, that really throws off the reproductive hormones in the cycle, so like estrogen and progesterone. So for a woman, that would normally happen. Plus the feelings of anxiety are really high, because high cortisol and stress means that normally your progesterone isn't producing as much as it should be, and that's the calming hormone. So when that's not producing well for the woman that has a cycle, means like irregular cycles or absent cycles, or very low mood and high irritability that week before your period, and sometimes bad headaches around ovulation. So lots of things happen.
Okay. But
I suppose
it's not just at that point, but it can kick in at that point a week before for the period. But in terms, so one has to be kind of taken into consideration and just paying attention. Am I losing my temper? Am I getting into a poor mood? Okay.
Yes. And I think that's such an interesting point when you look back and think over time, it's just normalized now. You think, oh, wow, this person is really irritating me, or this work situation is really desperate. But actually, it's probably gradually got worse because you're probably in more negative mood because you're not getting enough sleep. So everything has them like negative tinted glasses on. So I think when you think of that, it's much easier to understand, like it's very gradual. And then you're at a point where, wow, everything seems really negative now. And I'm finding it very hard to even have normal conversations without seeing the negative in them. And I think that's like, science and everything aside, hormones aside, you'll just really notice that your interactions with people become more difficult, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. Do people become more introverted, not wanting to mix with others if they're in that place?
It's funny, I've had this conversation a few times lately with people, and we've had it's so interesting when you think now marks kind of 4 years since COVID lockdown happened. And loads of people are kind of coming out of the fog now and thinking, wow, I've been a hermit the last 4 years and I've really lost myself, but that became my norm. So I'm like backpedaling now. How do I get out of this? And how do I get into it, like I suppose my old self? Because, geez, I put up a Instagram story lately, and it was just like, I had a rainy day here and we didn't do anything for the day and we were inside, and it was just like, wow, loud noises, trying to entertain kids. It was crazy. And I just thought, imagine you had to do that for nearly 2 years of working from home, plus your kids were at home and they were trying to learn. That is the most abnormal, like difficult situation. So I think COVID taught us so much, like very hard lesson, but I think people are just coming out of it now, have been thinking, wow, like that isolation, how damaging that is. And now they don't really want to, you see, we become so normal that everything's on screens at a home and Zoom, that actually like social anxiety is real, of people going out. And I think that's a big thing now. Even you probably noticed that, like, people aren't going out as much as they used in a social setting a lot of the time, or going to live events. Like people say, oh, I can just watch it at home, and that kind of thing. What used to not create that much stress, probably because I suppose it's not as familiar now to go out, now creates more stress. So there is a level of like having to re-enter society nearly after that. And I know it's 4 years on, but I think we're only seeing now people are going back to the workplace maybe 2 days a week, and they're, beginning to come out of the fog. Sorry, I have a visitor.
You're fine.
Oh, good. I'll find the eggs in 10 minutes. Is that okay? Thank you. Big painting.
That's it. That's what it's all about.
Sorry, we'll learn a lot from I think COVID studies and stuff in the next few months, I think a lot's going to emerge about how important it is to be continuously getting out of your comfort zone.
I read Johann Hari's book. I'm not sure you might have read it or came across it. I think it's called Stolen Focus.
Yeah.
And he spoke about, it's a very interesting book to read. He spoke about the impact that the big corporations are having upon us. And he's saying that society and big tech is actually making us really anxious. And he said that mindfulness and breathing exercises, well, at least how I interpret it, he said, really, that's not going to make much of a difference because the stressor is still there. Now, I'm just thinking about your life in terms of the conversation. Okay, I am in the west coast of Ireland here, right? You spoke about exposing yourself to daylight. Now, you can see daylight outside there, right? That's our typical, and I'm sure if you were to look at your sky, it's very, very bright. But
I have the curtains down.
my question is, is it the external stresses, or in other words, stresses there? Okay, is it the factors which are causing us to be stressed, such as the big tech, the corporation, the family, all of that, or is it our reaction and what we can do to help ourselves? I'm just thinking about, because he's almost saying that it's all about the big tech. I, for example, and we're saying that we can really help ourselves. Where do we meet, do you think, with that conversation?
Again, this is something I've thought about lately so much. I think there's a threshold that's individual for people. So if you've worked a lot on like really deeply understanding yourself, really learning the tools, I think a lot of really stressful situations, you'll still come out of them fairly intact. But for the individual that doesn't have them tools, doesn't understand how they got to a certain situation psychologically, it's very difficult. But then I also think there's a certain amount of stress any individual can deal with. Like if you're in an environment you're in the wrong relationship, you're in the wrong career, I think then no matter what tools you have, it's quite difficult to actually feel present and regulated if you're up against it all the time. You know, we can deal with like maybe certain stresses throughout the day. When it's constant though, we're not made for that constant. Like there should always be some level of break. But then I think, I always say this, it's so subjective. Like, okay, I'll get them for you in 2 minutes, my love. Is that okay? I'm just going to get the eggs. Sorry about that.
No, you're grand.
Sorry about that.
No, you're grand. No, you're fine. No worries. No problem. So one moment. I'm just going to. So coming back to that, I at one point worked in a job I absolutely hated now, and I'm sure many people are in that situation. It was a job that I took straight out of college, just where I came across breathing, but it was towards the end of it. The problem with that I felt, Becky, if I look back at it, I was so negative about the work that I felt that I couldn't leave it. I don't know, it's kind of weird. It's almost that your judgment is so clouded, and I had poor sleep now, by the way, and I had poor breathing as well.
Yes.
That mentally I wasn't in the capacity to make the right decision because of the stress that was on top of me.
Yeah.
So, sometimes it's a lot easier to make a decision when we feel calmer.
Yes, absolutely.
Does that come up in conversation with people?
I think people won't make a move or change until they actually get to a certain point where they're feeling good. That's why so much people, I suppose, stay in the same career for so long, because they actually haven't had any breathing room or headspace to think, wow, I need to reassess this. So exactly what you said, you can be so psychologically stuck in it, you can't actually see any other avenues. And like that kind of vision, when you have the glasses on, like you and I have experienced that, when you're in a situation and you can't see past what you're in. And that's why I suppose we always say hindsight is 2020. When you leave it, say, for example, you become redundant and you're thinking soon, wow, that was so lucky because I never would have left. So I think it's so interesting, like, unless something pushes you into having to reassess until it gets so painful you cannot stay any longer, you can stay to a certain point. Like, you probably didn't like it, but at the time you didn't hate it. And
Oh,
until
I
it
hated it.
you hated it. Oh God, yeah. So I suppose, yeah, then it has to,
But
what
I don't
punctured.
think I realized how much I hated it. Right? That's the thing.
Yeah, I think back about that. I taught in a school in England for 2 years, and it was just, I couldn't understand at the time why anyone would be a teacher in England. I just thought, wow, how are they even getting people? But didn't I stay there 2 years? Didn't everyone else stay there? Now, there was a high turnover, but that was because people had to leave because they were so mentally stressed. But I still stayed in that situation I thought was awful, because I thought, oh, we have a mortgage to pay. I have no other options, and it's just incredible. Like, we can stay in a situation that's pretty unbearable. But what got me out of that was I got pregnant. I'd probably be still there. So it's just interesting. What?
Totally. Totally. But does this kind of turn around then? Say somebody is in that position, but then if they start helping themselves a little bit, if they feel a
Oh
little bit
yeah,
of a success, does it kind of, and that's what I would like to talk about. You spoke about sleep, but I'd love to know the other pillars that you feel, because if we're quite low,
yeah.
we need something that we're starting to feel that we're successful in, and we're feeling better. We're feeling better in ourselves, and we're more confident about taking the jump of making a
Yes.
decision of getting out of the situation that's causing the issues, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I think it's always, if you're progressing in something, that'll seep into other areas. So for me at the time, I put all my efforts into triathlon training, marathons. And when I was seeing some level of success, like participation success in them, it kind of gives you a boost of confidence. If you're getting confidence in at least some area of your life, then you're feeling, okay, I can achieve
At
things. If
least
you're
one.
not, just one, that's all
Yeah.
it takes. So even if you say, right, I always say to the clients that are burnt out or really stressed, you just need one win of the day. You're literally asking yourself in the morning, what can I do today that's a win for me? That might be sitting down for 10 minutes and having a coffee without moving. That's
Yeah.
a win. And that's then when you say or do what you say you're going to do, that's confidence building. You're just saying, oh, wow, I've kept my promise to myself. And I think the more you do that and you stack that confidence and you stack the proof, the easier it is to say, right, this isn't the career for me, but I'm making changes in the rest of my life. And I know I'm teeing myself up to make changes here as well. But
Yeah.
it's that, like, minute initial change that's so important. But like triathlons and marathons aside, it's the smallest of things you might want to do for yourself. Like, even, wow, I haven't had breakfast in ages because I'm too rushed in the morning, and you're carving out 10 minutes for yourself. Or I'm saying, right, I'm going to write my to-do list before I leave the house. That way my head's more clear for the day. It's the smallest things that can create such an impact. And I suppose when you look back and you see how little headspace you've had in the past, or how much you've been rushed, some of it's very unnecessary because we haven't had time to take stock and reevaluate where we're at, reevaluate the environment. Yeah, so it really is about, like, taking that time to a lot of the time it's actually when people are on holidays, then they get to reassess, and that's when people leave the job, like the weeks after a holiday, because you've had a pause and you think, wow, maybe that's not good for me, maybe I don't want to do this.
Even those things that you described, they don't cost anything.
No,
Like,
no. And that's it. Like, it's exactly what we're all about. It's like, for me, the vagus nerve exercise, for you, the breathing, all them things are free. All them things take very little time. But I think people chase the big things. And I listened to an interesting podcast the other day, and they talked about when people make a vision board, they put like this crazy house on it and fancy car. But really, what you want to be in, like, I suppose, like an athlete, you want to actually be having imagery of the process. So all the things you have to do to get to a point, not the end result. We're looking at the process here. So, like, if you want to run a marathon, you're thinking of all the early morning rainy days you have to get up and run. And you actually have to feel that and be like, wow, this is going to be my norm because this is going to help me get from A to B. So a lot of it is, I think, being realistic, like, what do I have to do, rather than saying, all right, tomorrow I'm going to buy a Maserati. Like, what are the building blocks? What are the steps? So I think that's really important to be thinking, like, what do I need to do to get a certain point, rather than just hoping and willing you'll get a new job. What are the steps in between? Like, and a lot of the time people say, I hate my job, but there's two factors here. Okay, maybe the job is desperate and maybe you really do need to get out, but also your mindset probably is in a really bad place. And before leaving the job, wouldn't it be great to get a handle of your thoughts and to get a handle of your physical health, for example? Then you're in a much better position to reassess and get the new job. So I think that's like a major factor is that area. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My head's like, whoa, I need to think. Wish I did this earlier.
So even for somebody to get out, go for a half-hour walk in the morning, you know,
Yeah.
if they weren't doing it before, but the fact that they're giving themselves some attention.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. And it's like self-compassion is such a major part of this. Why do you rush? And why do you do behaviors that are not good for your health? Because you lack self-compassion, because you're not carving out the time to be nice to yourself. And I always say to someone, what would you do to someone you really like and love? You'd say, okay, go for the walk in the morning, relax. You know that people always say to you, oh, would you relax and sit down? But you're not doing that for yourself. So it's like them little mindful moments go such a long way. And you know, I suppose a few years ago when somebody talked about mindfulness or meditation or breath work or any of that kind of thing, they thought it's just kind of a bit crazy, like a bit fairy and hippie. And now it's like, okay, all this is backed in science. All of this it's so clear that we have to have mental headspace throughout the day. We're made to have mental breaks, but we're absolutely addicted to thinking. Like for a very long time, if I didn't keep thinking, I nearly felt like, I suppose, anxiety, because if I stopped thinking, something bad would happen almost. Like we're so programmed to be continuously thinking about the to-do list and what do I have to do next. But it's actually that few seconds or minutes of headspace a day that makes you so much more productive, present, happy. But not many people are getting them breaks throughout the day. Not who I see anyway.
Well, I think it's rigged. If I was to be skeptical, I think it's
Yeah.
rigged against people. And I think even the education system, and I know you're coming from the you know, the education system, we have been trained how to think. You know,
Yes.
like we, by attending 12 or 14 years of formal education, like what's the whole purpose of the education? Other than to, if I was to be very cynical about it, I would say is to make us into very disciplined and compliant workers that we pay tax to support the system. There's nothing about the self-happiness of the individual, at least when I went to school. Now, I'm 20 years ahead of you, so it's a different story. But there was nothing about anything we as an individual to achieve. There was nothing about our ability to deal with stress. There was nothing about, aside, you know, training us how to think and reason and decipher and break information into tiny pieces, but the other side of it, teaching us how to bring a stillness to the mind.
Oh, it's mind blowing when you look at this concept. That's what I originally was going to do before I said, right, I'm going to go into schools, and the TY program, if you're not from Ireland, that's, I suppose, your gap year where you explore other avenues when you're like 16. And I wanted to go into schools and deliver a curriculum in TY to teach them about, I suppose, everything from hormone balance to regulation, stillness of the mind, all that, because I thought, wow, this is crazy. They're not learning anything. And every time I bring out a new ebook or a program, everyone says, how the hell were we not taught this in school? And it's just bananas. It's like basic understanding of how we should operate. Like cycle syncing as a concept is basically just kind of matching your nutrition and exercise to your cycle. And when I put out videos on that, people's minds are absolutely blown. And I'm just thinking, this is crazy that people don't understand the basics of their needs, you know, your needs. And like going back to schools, I actually thought about this. My twins now are 3, and I thought, geez, I was thinking lately, like, would homeschool be the worst idea? Whereas if you said that to me a few years ago, I would have thought that's crazy. I would never do that. They'd be so isolated, blah, blah. But then when you think about how nice it would be for them to have like free time, headspace, and then do like some focus learning throughout the day, but not have to be really sedentary for a lot of the day. And I suppose that's a huge thing for me, is the sedentary aspect as well. I don't think it's any good for the mind when you're still like sitting down a lot of the day. So you can see why, like, you're right, into the school system isn't really made for us to thrive. It's just preparing us to do the exact same in the workspace, to sit down for a long day and to not be moving. And it's like, oh, you need to practice this for a long time before you'll be able to do it when you're older. And honestly, it's like even me saying this is mad, because when we were young, my parents homeschooled us for 2 years, and me and my sister thought it was just crazy. We thought, why are you doing this? But at the time, the school we were in was like, just a lot of things were collapsing, management, etc. So we were actually, they had no choice but to pull us out at the time. And we were nearly waiting to get into another school, and that turned into 2 years. And it was such a nice 2 years, because like mom was off work and she brought us like doing things every day. We did some learning, but it was like really nice to be like, imagine an adult did that, you know, and you had that freedom. And so little people have that freedom to like do what they want throughout a day and not have to sit down and be focused from 9 to 5. And you'll see now ADHD is, everyone's talking about ADHD at the moment. And people are recognizing, wow, this scenario we've created is actually really hard, not just like for everyone, especially for people with ADHD. But it's very interesting, like what we've normalized, sitting down all day, trying to focus, forced focus for a lot of the day, is really, really tough. And we're not really made to do that.
Totally. Coming back to your point, so we spoke about sleep. Because I'm just conscious of, say, somebody who is listening, and if we can give them a couple of little tools that, you know, they can help themselves. So sleep quality is very, very important. You spoke about nutrition and physical exercise related to the menstrual cycle. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, so I suppose there's so few studies on this because most studies are on males, but even if I just look and anecdotally or look at any of my clients, most people will talk about PMS the week before their period, where they feel low mood and their hunger gets higher. That's because progesterone and estrogen are they're fluctuating. Progesterone's trying to build, and we need more nutrients that week. Some say about 10% extra calories that week. Metabolism is higher. We also need more rest. We also need less really intense exercise. We still need exercise, but just not your highest intense, like really difficult. Say you're training for a marathon, you don't want to be doing the full marathon distance and doing speed runs that week. You might want to be doing your recovery runs, etc. So like you're still doing exercise, just not as intense as maybe say ovulation, which is halfway through your cycle when you're feeling a lot of energy. So if you look at that concept alone, like the week before your period, you're meant to, I suppose, slow down a little bit to allow the hormones to build, because progesterone doesn't like fasting, for example. It doesn't like really intense exercise, and it doesn't like intense stress. So just understanding that, imagine how much easier you've made 1 month or 1 week of every month for yourself. You know, you're making actually the rest of the month much easier, because you don't have to recover after really low mood and I suppose been just exhausted then the rest of the month. So then you're thinking, okay, I can match my nutrition and exercise to the fluctuations like that, but also how can I match this to the way I work? Can I arrange more of my meetings where I'm feeling a bit more sociable? You know, like you want to hide nearly the few days before, you just want to go and be quieter. So how can I think logically to make my life easier? And if you understand the way your hormones fluctuate over, I would say, the month cycle, it's so much easier to have successful months where you don't feel exhausted and you feel more energized. And I've done it all throughout my 20s. I've done 1 meal a day for a year. I've done loads of fasting. I've done really intense, like marathons, triathlons, you name it. I've done a lot of really intense physical training programs, but I've trained as if I was a man, or I've fasted as if I was a man, because I thought, isn't that great? Fasting so beneficial. Yes, it is, but it needs to be done with your hormones, as does nutrition and exercise as much as you can. So any woman that comes to me and they're having difficulties with imbalances in that have a cycle, we, to an extent, there's no hard and fast rules here. It's not rigid, but you're just listening to the body a little bit more. Right, I'm feeling tired, I might rest. Or, you know, I'm feeling extra hungry this week, I might have more nutritious meals. And it really is as simple as that. But the whole framework of cycle syncing just makes a woman aware that we have to listen to our bodies a little bit more, even though that's the opposite of what we've been told for many years, that you should push through any, like no pain, no gain, that kind of thing, that concept. And I think we're only coming out of that era now where people are saying, wow, that actually did more damage than good when I wasn't listening to the cues my body was giving me.
Yeah, I wonder if we're so stuck in our heads, we don't necessarily listen to our body because we're so disconnected. And I think females are better at that than men. I think men are even worse.
Yeah.
So for a female then, so in the early stages of the early phase of the monthly cycle, say menstruation, a follicular phase, would be to do more kind of intense physical exercise. And then ovulation and luteal phase is really to kind of go easy. So would you be talking, do you talk about zones, or do you talk about just the female to listen to her body during the exercise?
Yeah. So I personally think it's more about listening because, so say, for example, the menstrual phase is the first few days, then you have your follicular phase and your energy is rising. So that's when, like, take advantage of that. Ovulation is when your energy is the highest, mid-cycle. And then you still have another week after that where your energy is pretty good. But then kind of you're winding down the second half of the luteal phase, the week before your period, where that's when you want to be slowing down a little bit. But I always say to people, most people aren't even thinking about zones or anything like that at all. Like the majority of the women I see are just like wanting to do a bit of physical activity. They're not training for anything. So really, like, great if you're looking into heart rate zones and you're doing a plan, then it's great. You have that knowledge. But for the majority of women, it's just about saying, okay, when can I really take advantage of my high energy levels so that I can push harder at this point? And when do I know when to pull back? And really, it's going to be so different for everyone. Some people will actually be able to lift heavy weights at certain parts of their cycle, and other people, it won't feel good. So, but you're exactly right. Most people are so disconnected that they don't even have them cues. So like when you're so disconnected, you don't even have a hunger cue. You're holding your pee all day. Like you're not listening to the body at all. So it does take time. And that's why that framework is like, okay, this is a reminder. You need to start listening a little bit more, because it's very easy after, as you well know, after a period of time to stop listening. And then the cues just kind of fade away because you've quietened them so much. And I think that's where a lot of people are.
Where do you see your life in terms of, like, so can you give me a kind of an idea of what you consider, for you've made changes in your life and you're living in a beautiful area in terms of the environment, the weather. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm sure you're carving out your own day. What was it difficult in making that decision? So you went from what some parents will say, a lifelong job, career, pension, everything going for you.
Yeah.
And you said, let's do my thing. So will you
Yeah.
just give me a bit of a journey on that?
Yeah. It's funny because I suppose a lot of things changed at once for me. When we separated, I was no longer tied into a mortgage. And that's actually psychologically what kept me in teaching a lot, because I didn't want to let down my other half at the time in the mortgage payments. Then the other side of it then was that I, as a lone parent in Ireland, if I went back teaching, it would have been hard for me to organise childcare. So I actually thought, wow, I really need to get a job where I'm going to be able to see my kids throughout the day, because I didn't want a situation where I was a PE teacher and having to do after school activities, which I used to really love. But then that'd mean I'm gone, we'll say 7 till 5 or 6 every day. And then the kids are going to sleep at 7 or 8 p.m. and I'm not seeing them. And I said, I, I just don't want that scenario, especially when I'm on my own and things are stressful anyway. So I kind of thought I have to make my own hours here. And I've always been quite all or nothing in a lot of ways. Where I've kind of tunnel vision. When I say I'm going to do something, I am doing it. And that's always been a characteristic. So I knew at that point I was all in, like I put all my eggs in the basket. Um, but you see, I didn't have anything to lose. I had no money, I had no mortgage, and I had nothing to lose at that point. So, it was like, it's different for other people because they have another partner, they have a mortgage, their kids are already in a school. I was different. Kids, I suppose it's unusual. They were only like 6 months when we separated, so we weren't tied anywhere. So now we moved over to the UAE for a few months. And one thing I will tell you is that it's such a huge difference to have sun in terms of mood, in terms of sleep. It is massive, and it really needs to be addressed for anyone that's in a place like Ireland that it makes a massive impact, the lack of light. And it's really important to be doing other things to help you have like a nice day for yourself. Because sometimes if you have, for example, most people, a job they kind of think is okay or don't really like, it's raining all day and it's quite stressful. So so you really have to carve out nice things for yourself, like them 5 minutes to yourself each day. Otherwise, it becomes quite unbearable. And your sleep gets really, really negatively impacted when you're inside and you're not getting even any daylight, never mind sun.
Do many of your clients drink a lot of wine? And I'm only thinking that because when life, an easy way, like when somebody is in a difficult situation, it's very the mind is quite agitated. It's a very
Yeah,
natural thing to resort to alcohol. Do you see that amongst your clients? I know in the UAE
yeah.
it's probably alcohol prohibited, but I'm assuming that you're working with a lot of people who are in countries who drink. Um,
Yeah, no, I actually mainly my clients are Australia, America, Canada, England and Ireland and
okay.
Europe. So like so much people, and it's a conversation that was in my group coaching recently about a woman put up a comment and said, I need help to like reduce my wine consumption because she also really associates that with relaxation. So there's that huge psychological association as well as, all the other kind of quick fixes it gives in that moment. So for me, I went again completely all or nothing. I was a very stereotypical Irish girl, drank very heavily for my 20s. And since I had kids, I gave it up because I know too much about alcohol in terms of it being an endocrine disruptor. But for me, it was the days after where my mood significantly dropped. And that's what I had to get away from because it really does do what you expect it to do. It drops the mood so low. So I've become all or nothing, but lots of my clients aren't all or nothing and they try to have it in some moderate way. But it's such an interesting concept for women and it's such like a global thing where people rely on it for relaxation because they don't have other tools. Because it's the easiest, quickest one and everyone else does it. So I think I actually feel like when I talk about alcohol, I feel like some kind of a hypocrite because I've drank so heavily for so long, but I can pretty safely say now I suppose I have been for the last 5 or 6 years, finished with it purely because it impacts sleep so negatively. And that's a huge part. It's so linked to sleep and then in turn your mood.
Yeah, no, it's alcohol is a strange one. Listen, I love a pint,
Yeah.
but I also realize that we have a few drinks of a Friday or Saturday night. We're waking up on our day off and we're feeling crap.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah,
it's just
yeah,
bizarre. Like it's a drug that society is encouraging you to take. And it's the only drug that if you went into a situation, especially in Ireland, and if you were to say to people, I'm not drinking, people look at you strangely.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's just
What's wrong?
bizarre. What's wrong?
Are you
What's
on antibiotics? That's the question asked.
or are you pregnant?
Are
But
you pregnant? Yeah.
so,
It's funny, yeah. And
you
like
know,
all my family, all my friends, everyone has a drink now and again for sure. And in Ireland, it's so associated with celebrations and relaxation and all the rest of it. But I think you really have to look at where you're at mentally. And is that going to be the tipping point for you? Like it's different for you. You're having the odd pint, but you're pretty balanced. The person that's already at breaking point, you throw alcohol into the mix, that'll tip you over the edge.
totally.
So I think,
Yeah.
again, subjectivity.
But it's a very natural thing to do for that person. When you're feeling
Yeah.
crap and you're feeling highly stressed, it would be very
Mm.
natural that you want to resort to alcohol. But of course, you wake up the next morning, you're going to be in a very bad place in terms of
Yeah.
making decisions and feeling lousy. And it's
Mm.
almost self-perpetuating. Do you
Yeah.
talk to your clients about that? Do you ask them to come down or reduce the alcohol or not to sound preachy, but kind of teasing out the effects of it because sometimes when people are in that because society does put a pressure on us to keep going and the
Yeah.
government too.
Yeah, for sure. I have within the program, there's a few master classes on just what happens physically to the body. So just like in terms of endocrinology and how it's an endocrine disruptor, and just people piece together the pieces of the puzzle. Oh, okay, my perimenopause symptoms are worse because my progesterone isn't building like it should because I'm over drinking. Or okay, my mood's very low because X, Y, and Z. So for me, it's just about educating. I'm not telling you to have any units or any
Yeah,
guidelines. I'm not doing that. I'm here to just educate you and just give you the knowledge, know what it does to the body, and you can do with that knowledge what you want.
yeah, yeah.
And again, like everyone's so different that, yeah, I think most people that are in the program, there's some level of moderation because they fully understand what it does to the body. And some, once they understand, they can't unlearn what you've learned, as they say. So some people then just think, right, I'm in a situation where I'm quite burnt out. I've been using alcohol as a coping tool for a long time. And other people, normally the two come together, where you have alcohol as the coping tool and overeating. So it's like they're both avoidance mechanisms. We're just avoiding dealing with what's in front of us. So I think once you understand what are we avoiding or what are we actually really using it for, and when you really understand that, it's much easier to make sense of it. Like a lot of people will use wine in the evening to forget about the workday. You know, we just want to blank it out, have a bit of a stop in the way we think. But then obviously the day or two after, it gets worse because the problem gets bigger because we just avoid it.
Yeah. My last question, I'm just conscious of time. Social media, even
Yes.
though you're a big proponent on it because you're doing so well. But do you find that social media helping or hindering with people's anxiety? I think it's a pretty obvious question, but just your
Yeah.
take on it.
I just find this really hard one because it all depends on what you watch. The algorithm will give you more of it. So you have to be very careful what you watch. You know, my social media is only people like yourself, people that are dealing in the realm of helping, they're giving tools. I am not letting anyone into my algorithm or that For You page that's any bit of negativity. So like I'll do a cull every kind of month where, say, I looked at a video and I wanted to look at the comments or something, and then the algorithm started pushing more of that to me. I think, okay, I gotta reassess now. I need to unfollow X, Y, and Z people, and I need to make sure I watch more of the videos that I should be given to my mind. But ideally then, also, you're getting an app like Opal or any of them apps that limit your screen time and block you out of the app after X amount of minutes, because that kind of level of scrolling is just so detrimental to our health. And that like quick dopamine hit just means we're seeking more of that. So like I've had to become really strict with it because I'm obviously posting on social media every day and it's very easy to just scroll afterwards or before. So it's, for me, it's very much now like post and ghost. I do my bit I need to do and then I get off the apps. Otherwise, I don't have the time. I don't have the time for it anyway. And it's a huge one I talk about in terms of evening. What happens when you're scrolling in the evening or the morning, especially the morning? You're creating the day for yourself. If you're scrolling and you're getting all these quick dopamine hits where you're looking at people you're quite envious of, that just carves out a really difficult day for yourself. So I think that level of creating an environment where the phone isn't too involved, like you walk into the house, you put the phone in X shelf. In the evening, you charge your phone in another room when you go to bed, and you create that environment where it's not a huge part of your day. If, like me, it's you're on your phone a lot for your work, you have to be even more disciplined. But for the person that is just in their 9 to 5 job, like there has to be boundaries with it. And I think a lot of studies and evidence will come out in the next few years about how negatively it impacts mental health for a number of different reasons of like, as I said, dopamine, but also just time and taken away from areas you could be doing really productive things, learning. So I think like there's such, people are getting so much benefit out of it, but much, like a lot of people are getting a lot of negative things out of it. So that's very important to be aware of. And I always say that to clients, you got to be reassessing what you're doing on like a weekly basis with your phone. Look at your phone habits. Look at the time you're using it per day. What apps can you download to stop you using and wasting time on it?
Right. Becca, it was a great conversation. How do people hear of you?
So Health with Holland is my Instagram, Facebook, TikTok handle. Yeah, that's where I'm most at.
Good stuff. Well, it's a pleasure. And
You too, Patrick. Thanks so much for having me.
thank you very much.